Dr. James Davis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Professor Whitty, some moments ago you referred to the UK's response in terms of the development of therapeutics as being extraordinary, but I wondered what your view was as to how that could be improved further still, looking forward to future pandemics.
Thank you. Well, I think let me just say why I think it was extraordinary, because I think it is important that we celebrate the things that have gone well before saying where I think we could improve further. I mean, the numbers in terms of people who are in studies in the UK are quite extraordinary. So yesterday, just to take an example, yesterday the recovery trial, which is the largest trial of therapeutics, reached 20,000 people, UK citizens who'd volunteered to be part of this. Other trials are also ongoing. We currently have 90,000 people under trial, and in total, over 640,000 people are taking part in studies of COVID of some sort or another in the UK. That is an absolutely extraordinary achievement, and it builds on a combination of things: the very strong foundations of the NHS, the very strong funders we have, the National Institute for Health Research, NIHR, which I run, the Medical Research Council, which is in UKRI, and the Wellcome Trust, among others, but there are also the medical research charities, so there's a good funding base, outstanding academic centres throughout the system, and very importantly, a very strong ethics and regulatory system, the HRA, the Health Research Authority, which looks at the ethics before things happen, and the MHRA, which regulates trials in particular. If you don't have those building blocks, it's very difficult to do this. So the fact we've been able to respond so quickly has a lot of building blocks. But the biggest reason is that UK citizens have been extremely generous with their time and prepared to take the slight risk of going into a clinical trial with a new drug or vaccine because they wish to do that for society. And I think they are extraordinary heroes of this, because that, you know, if you just think about those numbers, when we get to the end of next year, I think we'll look back and find that a very high proportion of the research on therapeutics has been done here in the UK, and it's because of all these things coming together. So I think there's a lot to be proud of, and if you look at the number of drugs that have been tried by Recovery, by REMAC-CAP and a variety of other trials, it is a very remarkable number. What could we do differently? I think that the biggest, I think where we demonstrated real speed was on what's called phase 3 studies. We've got a great skill set in this. These are drugs which are where you can actually take them straight through to a rapid, large-scale trial. And the recovery trial, which I've talked about, ran out of Oxford. Many people funded it, including NIHR. That has been highly successful, but that takes drugs that are already licensed for other uses. We know a lot about their side effects. We know, in the main, we know a lot about their other properties. And you take them into large-scale trials where you can find things out very quickly. That's been really strong. I think we have been slightly less strong on what's called phase 2 studies, which is an earlier stage of development. And there, I think the key thing is to identify which drugs it is you need that work. And the difficulty here, and what we did fairly ruthlessly, because we had to, was there was only a certain number of people who can go into trials, and we set up at the beginning of this a system for urgent research priorities where we prioritised only a very, very small number of studies and said those are the only ones that can actually happen with full support from the whole system. And that was because what we were really worried about, and what has happened actually in many other countries, was that people would launch 300 trials, no one of which would reach its endpoint because they were all too small. So it was really important to do the prioritisation. But the difficulty is, of course, there are winners and losers when you do prioritisation, and the worry is, are you actually prioritising the wrong things? So I think we were very strong on the phase 3. I think we've been very strong, thanks to the Medical Research Council and others, on some of the basic sciences. I think the phase 2 area, I think we've got lessons to learn, and I think when we come and look back, I think that's the bit which probably we would do better, again, learning from the experience this time. And that's not to say we did it badly. I don't think we've done it well, but I think we could have done it even better.
Thank you. James?
Thank you very much. So earlier in the inquiry, it was alleged that there had been poor investment in platforms for developing new treatments, both in this country and worldwide. Would you agree with that comment?
I think probably Sir Patrick, who's got a full industry experience in this, is the best person to answer. I can add to anything he says.
Well, I think we've covered it for vaccines, that there is an issue about manufacturing capability and capacity in the UK, which is being addressed. So that is, I think, something that needs looking at. For therapeutics, as Chris has said, for existing medicines to be tried for a new disease in phase 3, I think the infrastructure worked really well. And I think that's so important, because if you look around the world, there's been pressure in all sorts of countries to say such and such a drug looks exciting, we should give it to everybody. And we saw that with chloroquine and various other examples. You can't understand what works from just looking at a small study. You need to test things in a big study. And that, I think, is what's been so important to end up with both the positive and the negative results. So clinical trial infrastructure, I think, has been well funded, well supported, and actually worked well. I think if you move on to the question of new drugs, we've clearly got 2 major pharmaceutical companies in this country and lots of smaller ones as well. New drugs take much longer to come through, so I only expect to start seeing sort of really brand new targeted drugs for COVID to start getting into clinical trials, possibly this year we might see some. And that's really in the hands largely of the big companies and the small companies to do that. And there I think the UK actually has got quite a good position, and we'll see what happens in terms of the drugs they may come up with. I will pick on one specific example though. Very early on, it was possible that so-called neutralising antibodies could be beneficial. Those are antibodies which have been made in the laboratory that neutralise the virus, essentially mimicking what a vaccine does, but doing it by giving the antibody itself. The sequence of the antibodies became known quite early on, what might be useful to look for, and the UK has picked up on that, and companies and others have picked up on it. We do have, again, I think, a deficit in the ability to manufacture these things at scale. And so I think that's an area, again, that needs looking at. The ability to manufacture antibody production is where something's go for. And then the final point is people often say, well, can't you just have lots of drugs ready to go that you screen and you hope that you're going to pick the right one at the beginning? I mean, people always do that in a pandemic. We did it for Ebola, we did it for all sorts of things. It's worth doing, but it's got a low success rate in terms of pickup.
Thank you very much.
I'll add one more thing on this, which is the platform we haven't talked about and is absolutely critical here is the NHS. The NHS in all 4 nations, well, the NHS and equivalents in all 4 nations, has a real tradition of doing trials and of being very evidence-based. So when I and the other CMOs wrote to all the hospitals and GPs and said we don't want anyone doing experimental drugs without trials because trials is the way you do it, that was just accepted as a completely normal thing in the UK. I think that would have been quite difficult to do. In fact, it was very difficult to do in many other countries because of a strong tradition of evidence-based medicine and people doing trials and then paying attention to the results. And I think that has saved us from doing a large number of things in an ad hoc way with drugs that were either useless or even dangerous.
Thank you very much indeed.